I'm reminded of one of the giants in forest research that maybe a few of you have heard of was Dick Tynus. He's one of the guys that went over into the Middle East and Afghanistan looking for species that would do well in our Great Basin area. And he related this story, and knowing Dick, I'm pretty sure it was true. He was at one of these international conferences that had just lots of multiple concurrent sessions, and he wasn't paying attention, and he was scheduled to be the last speaker at his session. So he goes to this room, and it's empty except for one person in the audience. And he goes into his presentation anyway. There's somebody there. So he does his presentation, and he gets through, and he says to the person in the audience, this single individual, he says, I really want to thank you for sitting through my presentation. That was awfully nice of you. And the gentleman stood up and said, yeah, but I'm next. So there you go. One of the things that I wanted to focus on, is during our regional workshops, one of the things that we asked was for pre-work so we could find out what was going on within the region. And those of you that were there, remember we did the yellow stickies and we got in groups and we talked about what we needed. And we came up with goals and key points and objectives to meet those. And I've gone through and sort of selected out the ones that relate to demonstration sites, because it was acknowledged at the time that there are a lot of people that are out there on the landscape who have been managing shortleaf for a long time. If we go to the Silvix textbooks or talk to people on the campus, they're going to tell us that, well, we don't really have a lot of knowledge about that, but if you go beyond that, you find this native knowledge. So we decided that what we needed to do, and I put this one up because it's been a struggle to have a biennial conference. We're hoping to have a more stable funding. But we talked about the development of these demonstration sites on an eco-regional, statewide kind of basis. And the key word in this first action is network. And I think David Arnold alluded to that a little bit ago. There's all kinds of things out there, but if we don't know about them, we won't be able to access them. So we have decided that that's one of the things that we need to do. Promote the development of these demonstration sites on all types of lands and locations. So we wanted to demonstrate the restoration of diverse herbaceous understory. I think I quote McCree Anderson all the time talking about this supermarket that comes with a savanna, at least a supermarket to wildlife. And the other thing that I know is out there are areas where there's an intact herbaceous layer. The third one there is that there's an awful lot of need to make sure that we have all the cereal stages and the various overstory compositions. And this would go back to what academics would be looking at, because when we talk about trying to transfer what's known in the West to the East, immediately they start talking about the composition is different, the competition based on the composition that's different. So when it comes to the establishment of restoration areas, we need to have some protocols, and I don't think as I said before, we're not going to get these from silvicultural professors at this point, and we need to figure out how to implement restoration plans. I think David Arnold alluded to this a little bit earlier. You've got a landowner and you've got a forester that are unfamiliar with the species, so how do we go about being able to make sure that they have what they need to move forward? And then we also, again, to make sure that these demonstrations are available. If you think about it, the National Wild Turkey Federation, Northern Bobwhite Quail Conservation Initiative, NRCS, Farm Services Agency routinely put on landowner workshops. And if we have a network of these demonstration sites and somebody that's willing to do some of the legwork, it would be very easy to start to get some of these kind of landowner workshops where there's like multiple agencies involved, and we can highlight shortleaf. And if it's in a demonstration area where people can walk around and look at it, it makes it a lot more possible. So when it comes to this, to promote the development of accessible shortleaf pine workshops, this is coming right out of these key issues. Identify, as we said before, demonstrate the variation of communities, and then develop the pine network. So here's where I would need the help of a crowdsourcing. Taking these statements out of the key actions, and then we've got to have to figure out how to implement them. So when I say easily accessed, it's on public, it should be on public as well as private lands. Include areas with most intact herbaceous layers. They should contain all the variations, so we need to find sites that have all the cereal stages. And then they should become a network for demonstrating best practices and provide a forum. So out of that, this is, I've gleaned what the action plans in my mind are for trying to set up a demonstration network. So as a part of the plan, it was suggested that we needed to sort of highlight project areas where ongoing things are taking place. And my colleague, Holly Campbell, was tasked with coming up with some of these. So she got on the phone, and where she could, she tracked down the source of somebody that was working in an area. And I've listed here some of the ones. I would hope that there's individuals in the room that would say, hey, wait a minute, we're doing this. Well, contact Holly, because the only way we can get this network established is to find out who's doing what, where, what the key features on those areas are. And so some of these, I think Picture Creek, David Snocky was involved in that one. Stockton College, I know I had to tell Bob Anderson that I stuck his group up here as being, but Stockton College actually, if you, of course, I've not been there, but Mike Black was there, and he said if you walk out of the break room, you're walking right into a shortleaf forest. They've been managing it, they're cutting trails in it, they're putting signage on it. It would make a great place for public access. It's on, it's on public land, it's totally accessible. Good place to have a field with, a landowner workshop, because there's a cafeteria, there's conference rooms. I would point out that Stockton College volunteered to host our next biennial conference, which I think we should take very seriously, because not many of us have seen the Pine Barrens, especially the Pine Barrens that is being managed, because they don't manage the Pine Barrens. So this would be a good opportunity. I've listed here some of the sites that are on federal land. There's one or two that I'm not that familiar with. We have the Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge. There's also one in Upper South Carolina. It's on the Sandhills, and it's basically managed for longleaf. It's a great longleaf site, but if you walk across it, it undulates, and I'm pretty sure that that shortleaf had a part in that. Interestingly, about the Uwharrie National Forest, Bill Pickens and North Carolina Barry New got together with Fish and Wildlife Service and others, and they had a meeting with a group of NGOs and interested folks down near in Troy, North Carolina. And I would say that that's starting to become what I envision as an affiliate of the Shortleaf Pine Initiative. We can't, this is just too big for one organization. And we're not trying to fill all those things. But as we have groups emerge, we need to encourage those groups and provide funding for them. Through a sleight of hand, I was actually able to provide some funding to that group. Those are opportunities that will be available as we move forward so that we can encourage a bottom-up approach to this. These are on the website under Tools and Resources, Management in Action. The ones that we've developed so far have mostly been because Holly was able to extract these from very busy people, and we have a format. It's very easy to do, and we'd love to expand this as much as we can. But as we gather these, this is sort of like our base for the network. So what I've done is I've taken the ones that we have at this point, 17 of them, and I put them on this map. And so what's interesting here is you can see some of the areas are not covered, and this is where we get to a question. What I've done here is, this is a list, and I made these up. Somebody can argue or disagree with me. We said we wanted stands representing cereal stages, all the cereal stages, overstory densities, and the species composition. So if you think of this as a network, there's a lot of those that we don't have yet. And yet, as was mentioned by David Arnold, they're out there. It's just a matter of trying to find them. They could be on national forests, it could be on a wildlife refuge, it could be an abandoned piece of land that's along a railroad track that was always burned. So then how to best to determine how many ecotypes? And this is where it gets tricky, and I've already sort of shown my preference for going with Nature Conservancy, but there's not, if you talk about cereal stages based on these ecotypes, you can find a consensus in the literature. When it comes to overstory density, we can figure that out by going into the literature. Composition. But when it comes to ecotypes, this is where we get into trouble, and this is why I go toe-to-toe with lots of folks that say, you can't do this as a region-wide thing because Arkansas is different than the West is different than the East. And I have had several people during the meeting point out the fact that if you took those slides from the talk at Tall Timber, or about tall timbers, or from up near New Jersey, from Arkansas, from Catoosa, if we could magically take people and drop them on those sites and say, where are you? They wouldn't be able to tell you. So we know, even though there's not really consensus about it, just from experiential kinds of stuff, we can see that there are a lot of commonalities. What I've put here, the Fish and Wildlife Service in their joint ventures, this is how they've divided our area. This is bird-centric. It's perfectly good. We could use it. It's got 7 habitat types in it. This one is from NatureServe. I've got the province level. They actually go down a little bit. And you can see some of the stuff jumps out almost right away. However, the area that we go to the next slide, oops, I don't have it in there. It's in the Joint Fire Science. They break that down a little bit differently. But I feel like this is a little bit closer to reflect the differences that we find based on soil, temperature, TNCs. Actually, I've done some of this work on what I call the Southern Native Plant Seed Increase and Restoration Project, SNPRSIP. And we use articles by Sorey and Wakely, which they were actually given money by the Department of Defense to start up in the top of North Carolina and go all the way to Florida using endemics to try to tease out what species belong there. And based on their knowledge, what I came up is very close to what we see in this TNC map. And when you find these breaks, it takes a lot of work. We've got to go in and do common garden studies. It's going to be a long time before we can do that. So this is the one that I would favor. So we would have 17 ecoregions. And in those ecoregions, we would need all the cereal types, we would need all the overstory compositions, we got a lot of work to do. So, again, just to sort of show you without all that busyness on the map with the names, just, of the ones we have, there's quite a few areas that we have a lot in. The ones where you see a lot in, that's because an area that for geological and other kind of reasons, a history of settlement and whatnot, why those are still present. So, funding opportunities. Not sure what happened to the photos in that. Oh, there we go. That's weird. The Forest Service has got a thing called stewardship contracting. Relatively new program, came out of the Farm Bill. But essentially, they can contract with NGOs, tribal groups, to go on Forest Service land and do work. So for instance, if you were able to find an extremely unique shortleaf stand, you could write a proposal for money to go on federal land and burn it. They would actually contract with you to begin to burn it, put signage on it, make a trail to it. And how that can be utilized has a lot to do with how well you can write, but it also involves in going to the National Forest System and getting a proposal and writing it. The more partners, the better it is. But these contracts can last for up to 10 years. They can come from an external source. So for instance, if you had an NGO like in Troy, North Carolina, the group that's working there, they can actually go on the URA National Forest and they can get a contract with that local forest to go in and do improvement, timber stand improvement on federal land with federal money. It's kind of an odd thing, but we are having to find ways to get some of this work done on the national forests, and it's clear that through funding from Congress we're not getting it, and when we do get money we go spend it on fires out west, and so we're having to find new ways to move forward. This is the one that I mentioned earlier. Fire science has broken this area up into just 3. The oak woodlands right now, we have representatives here from the I guess they actually are not organized this way, but the interior highlands, which is one of the Fish and Wildlife Services areas, overlays almost better with this than it does any of the other systems. But in that oak woodlands right now, there are quite a few projects that are going on that are done through a thing that they call, most people call these research proposals, but they call them funding opportunities. And what they do is, this is another opportunity to go out and seek funding from this Joint Science Fire Group. And in these proposals or their funding calls for funding, you can write based on their goals. There are several of these that are taking place right now. That one of them that I think Holly and I are hoping to apply for is looking at trying to get a fire science network. And then that's not really going as well as they thought, so now they're realizing they're going to have to bring in social scientists and others to try to get directly to landowners, because the message when you talk federal agency to federal agency, not a lot happens. So I'm not sure that that was insightful, but if you have any questions, there's several other opportunities. Kevin mentioned NRCS and their private landowner grants. There's a whole series there. Farm Services Agency has programs as well. So through, I guess, cooperative efforts, we saw also, I didn't mention them in my talk because NIFWIF has a set of grants. The U.S. Forest Service has a thing called competitive grants, which we work through the states. And if you went to your state forester, I'm sure David Arnold would be very willing to talk to anybody that came and said, we've got this group and we found this site and we need funds to do it. You could compete on a regional basis for Forest Service, state and private funds. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. And any questions? I'm not going to answer them, but you can ask them.